first thing I want to talk about a little bit is just like why storyboard projects, because there's kind of a lot of reasons, and you guys just saw how many different types of styles there are and why are they so different. And obviously the first reason is because you want to flesh out the sequence. That's like the obvious reason everybody knows. Like you want to figure out like the flow of shots and how you're going to communicate the story. But typically a lot of the stuff that we do, it's also to get the green light to like basically show the clients and wow them as much as possible. So you want the kind of this, the style. It's kind of not what they usually do in film as much, where it's just kind of like rough and scattered and really like chaotic drawings essentially, or like little scribbles. In a lot of what we do, it's more about like getting the exact idea or just a couple frames to represent like the core concept to get people excited about it. And then, and then the other thing obviously is to help a production be more efficient, because when you get into production, you guys know that there's just so many different departments, especially in animation, where it's like if you storyboard something, you realize like that side of the room doesn't need to be modeled or shaded. You don't have to waste your time with that because you've vetted it with a sketch, so you're just going through that whole process. I figured I'd share just some of the projects and kind of talk a little bit about the process that we've done. The first step is usually I'll meet with an art director or director, and you get as much reference for the characters. Sometimes, they won't know who the character is or what they look like, but you're just trying to download everything they know about the project. Because a lot of times, whoever you're working with, they've spent, a week or months, sometimes even, 6 months, coming up with an idea, or they've dealt with this client forever, and they've got all sorts of stuff in their brain that they don't realize you don't know. And you meet with them in the first like 5 minutes, you're just trying to like absorb and take notes and try and get everything. And it's really helpful, and a lot of art directors are timid. I'm glad a lot of people here aren't, is you try and get them to do little thumbnails. Even if they're stick figures, like here's a face, they're smiling, like it's literally just like symbols and stuff, because it's a way to sort of talk about what the story is in actual shots. Because a lot of times people, the tendency when you have a script, there's so many things that don't translate visually, so it's just sort of about figuring out what the key shots are, what really communicates this the best. So I love it. Like here's just a couple thumbnails. I think I got for one of these projects. It was for the Peabody in Sherman. But this stuff is, they're really light, but it's so useful. It's just like the basic blocking of what's in the shot. It makes your job so much easier, because sometimes you just don't know how wide somebody wants the shot, and that's the thing I think I've learned the most over the years just working at Famous Frames is the thing that I've improved the most. It's not the drawing. The drawing is sort of the easiest part of the job. It's the communicating and getting like every detail and trying to pull out the best ideas they have and then just plussing everything. That's kind of the goal. So these are sort of the thumbnails, and then the next phase is I go away. Usually I have like this scratch pad of a bunch of kind of drawings that almost look like this, that are just notes to myself and arrows and, exciting shot, heroic shot, whatever. But then I go away and I do basically a rough pass. I'll go like rough out the boards, kind of, based on the character designs and all that kind of stuff. Because I don't know what the purpose was for these boards, but I'm assuming it had something to do with getting a green light, because usually we don't do color or fancy boards like you saw from Famous Frames. So the next move is we basically take it to color, shade it, render it, if they're approved, because that is kind of another step. So this is one of the projects we kind of worked on, and a bunch of the other boards from that. You can kind of just see how the stuff transforms as you kind of go. Then I figured I'd walk you guys through. This is a different project I didn't do for you guys, but yeah, this is kind of an example of sort of my thumbnail process. I just go through and it's like,
what was this for?
This is for, it's like a basketball video game. It was like a Michael Jordan, I think it's NBA 2K17. And it's basically just a bunch of thumbnails I did for, this character that's, playing basketball. He winds up facing off with Michael Jordan. But this is kind of the thinking process where you go through and you're just trying to come up with dynamic shots, doodle in everything you possibly can. Here's this, I just figured this will help kind of explain the process, but this is a project I did for Bungie. It's the company that produced Halo. They did this, they scrapped Halo, they sold it to Microsoft, and they were developing this game, Destiny, and they wanted a bunch of little vignettes, little like scenes to, of some of the heroes in their character got like special powers. And in this scene, it's basically this hero character. He finds this corpse or this guy who's been slain, and he basically like gets the power of like he can form a bow out of his hand and shoot these like magical arrows basically. So this one was a lot of fun because I actually kind of got to craft it mostly myself. They didn't really have an outline for it or any of the details, so this is kind of the ideation process. But this is the most important phase of storyboarding. That's kind of what I kind of want to get across. So I basically sat with our director and kind of did these really quick doodles. So that's how I get through it, because all the information is kind of here, and then it's just taking it to the final. But this is basically like the slain character in the foreground. The other character kind of approaches, and there's sort of this like magical energy that's like in his hand. It like drifts up, and it kind of turns into this like glowing bow. You know, he sees this glowing bow in front of him. It like he reaches to grab it, but like this force field sort of like blasts him back. To emphasize his like feet, you know, tread across the ground that he's being forced back, and then it's kind of this wide shot. And then he basically decides to test this force field, and he like decides to push through and puncture it. And he grabs the bow, and it sort of like fuses into his hand, so he gets this special power. And then I wanted to do this dramatic shot that kind of is a little bit wider, but then tracks in to make it dramatic. He holds up his hand, and he realizes he has this power of the bow. It like spreads. And then I wanted to do a kind of a cool shot. You can see like a reflection in his thing with the bow in his hand, and then like a dramatic top shot where he like turns up towards camera basically to make it really dramatic and fires the bow, and it like sort of parts the clouds. But yeah, I mean, basically before this phase, I'd even have like a scrap piece of paper just doing a bunch of little thumbnails, talking it over with somebody, and then this is sort of like that next step. And then I basically just take that, and then there's a hero shot at the end. But then the next step is I basically just take it to sort of a finish. So it's and you know, you can go any direction. You can spend, these are like same thing, kind of a little bit more to wow the client, you know? So that last phase is probably one baby step above that would be like film boards, you know, or like if shooting boards. But then this is, you know, this is sort of like the wow to people for the thing. So basically, the key words that I remember jotting down is that this character is like mysterious, and that, you know, and trying to sell that mystery, and it's super, you know, like magical. Like you know, I'm jotting down all these things to try and create that in the frame. So I decided to do sort of this tracking shot that follows this, you know, silhouetted character as he approaches this character. You get the energy thing, and this is essentially the tracks up with the power as it forms sort of this bow. He realizes it, he reaches for the thing, it blasts him back, the energy. He decides to test this sort of force field and punctures his hand through. Grabs the bow, it fuses into his hand, and then we get that tracking shot and kind of the dramatic reveal where he realizes he has the power and it forms out of his hand. And then he fires the bow up into the sky. I figure that's kind of a good overview of the process. I figure I'd share a couple of just some of the projects that I've worked with on you guys. I did a Kung Fu Panda project. This one was, I think you guys hadn't quite, you hadn't didn't know what the story was yet for Kung Fu Panda, just that he finds his dad. So I think you guys came up with this concept that he travels all across the land, and then basically he encounters, you know, his dad, who's another panda, is, you know, on his journey. But we didn't know what the panda looked, you know, the dad was going to look like. We didn't know even how he encountered his dad. It was just, I think this was more of like a bid to try and like get the foot in the door for like, maybe we'll do a spot related to that. But this is basically him. He's traveled. I think there's a couple frames that start before this, but he's traveling across the land. he's going across the desert, this turtle, you know, moves past him because he's so tired. And then there's this series of, basically he's eating in these different environments. So he's snow covered. And then he's on top of this mountain and he loses his little rice ball down the hill. And he goes chasing it. They always say wide shots are like for the funny. And he goes tumbling down the mountain. And then the mountain's even bigger. It probably could have even been a bigger mountain. That would have been even a bigger payoff. And he crashes at the base of the mountain and then pull out to reveal this like mysterious father character, which we hadn't seen a design for yet. But this is, you know, just try to sell the idea. And then I think the final, I don't think I have the final frame, but he basically eats the rice ball is the gag. Another thing that I do, I just figured I'd talk about a little bit, I do a lot of character design. That's kind of how I started doing the whole animation thing. That's kind of how all artists start. They all start just like, I want to doodle a character, you know. I've got character designs from when I was like 6 years old still. But yeah, I do all sorts of like, a lot of animation design, and this was kind of a fun project. 300. They basically just, they wanted to redesign the Jolly Green Giant for like the next generation, I guess, like what's the 2020 Jolly Green Giant. So this is the reference they gave to us. This is another one where usually you get a lot more direction, but they were just kind of like, just run with it. We want to see a bunch of different incarnations of what type of feel he could have. So kind of going through these, and you got like the hippie Jolly Green Giant from the 70s and like hipster Jolly Green Giant. So then I just started playing with stuff. This is sort of like the boring average Joe Jolly Green Giant. I thought it'd be fun to do kind of like a, like almost like a Greek god, like Zeus type Jolly Green Giant. More like what if the Jolly Green Giant wasn't this like studly guy, just like this big dope, you know, who tells you to eat your greens. This is, I figure it's, you know, 2017, you like have like a Metro or a gay Jolly Green Giant. This is like my Bruce Campbell Jolly Green Giant. I thought like make him like this kind of like cocky, like kind of Roman, you know, kind of deal. Just sort of more playful, just trying to play with shapes and make him kind of more iconic, almost like a sprite or something. This is like the Lord of the Rings Jolly Green Giant. So I do the same thing with character design. It's the same thing. It's all about, I'll write down like 2 or 3 key words on the side for what I'm trying to draw to. It's a weird thing with artists, like you can't really, you're almost an actor. It's such a weird thing. If you ever watch an artist when they're sketching and they're really trying to make like, especially like expressions of faces or like in the animation world, and I wonder if 3D animators do this too, but you make the faces of the character. You can't help it. So you like, when even like sketching this guy, you're like trying to draw it, but you can't help but like pose however, you know, the character is. So it's pretty fun. And then you guys already saw a lot of this stuff. A lot of what I've done for Aspect in particular are these end cards. Pam showed a couple of them anyway, but they're basically like the box art, and it'll be like the animated characters sort of like running around or having a cute little moment, and then it's, you know, buy it on DVD. But there's a bunch of examples in here, but here's one of them. I think it's just the family hugging, and a lot of these would have text that kind of goes over them. You know, they all gather on the couch, like how, you know, a bunch of birds gathering on the couch. Rough fades. There's a ton of that stuff. Here's an example of, well, I mean, she kind of showed a little bit of this stuff, but this, I worked on the interview with Seth Rogen. So it was just like what film boards might look like versus, you know, super rough. You know, it's almost like the first kind of middle pass. You don't really have to, you know, this is kind of that one step in the middle or whatever. And then more end cards. And then here's just some of the stuff that I do that's kind of like unrelated, random other projects. I do a lot of poster design for, I always get the animation jobs, so one of the poster shops I work at, they're doing like Cars 3 posters. I mean, they'll do, it's a crazy business. I've only worked at a couple places. where they want to do full rendering. So you're painting stuff from scratch, and you basically, it's kind of a crazy business. And they'll do like 300 posters for cars, and they're the coolest posters you've ever seen, and then it always winds up being like 30 of the characters just smiling, like on a road. But, we go through like a ton of like these different stylistic, like weird passes that usually relate to the theme and stuff. Sometimes I do random illustration. This was a Gatorade Christmas card that I did for Chiat Day, I think, or one of those. BoJack Horseman. This is the poster shop again. This one, they actually, this was cool because usually we'll illustrate all these posters, but a lot of times they just send it to the 3D house to make. But this one was fun because they actually just printed I did the illustration, and they were like, we sent it off to the company to print. So that's I saw that on Netflix the other day. It's Family Guy pizza commercial. We do a lot of commercials at Famous Frames. This is my Christmas card this year that I didn't finish. Mighty Elf Jim with Frosty. Finding Dory poster. And just more boards. Oh, and my Donald Trump illustration. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions for me or Pam, as far as stuff we do, yeah.
Do you do everything by hand, or?
No, usually the process, I'll meet with people more and more, and I used to do everything by hand. Like my first job at Futurama, it was like a light table, and you're staring into a thing, and you got these stacks of sketches all around you, just toppling over. But it's so much more efficient. I have a Cintiq, like a big 22-inch Cintiq, and like a travel one, and it's just so much faster as far as you can scale stuff, you can zoom in. When I would sometimes you'll draw something and you'll be like, oh, that expression's wrong or that hand's wrong. And with the great part about working digital is you can scale that hand or move it or erase the expression and fix it. Whereas like with Futurama, you grab another sheet of paper and you redraw the whole thing, and So it's usually digital and just sending files. There's still some guys that work traditional, and a lot of times, as an artist, you're jealous of the people that get to bust out their charcoal and their, I work at some of the places with them, but pretty much never anymore, That's pretty rare. But.
Will, like, a company, take a look at your website and just choose, if they want to choose, an artist, will they just go off, the styles of the artist?
Yeah, I think and Pam can probably even talk to this more, but I think the company usually vets and goes through the website and kind of clicks around, this is cool, this fits with what we're doing. But then they'll call Famous Frames and they'll recommend here's the 3 guys that fit that mold the best. That's why I get the animation jobs, because it's usually some of I love doing it. It's fun. But then they'll recommend 3 people, and then it's also availability, because sometimes you'll be booked up for the next month, and it's do you want to do it when they're ready? But that's.
Yeah, a lot of people, to speak to that, will look at something and think it's cool and call and ask for a specific artist just because they saw something they liked, but they have no idea how they work or what their style is. So usually they'll call and say, Drew is one of our favorites, but he can do everything. So if they want, it's nice. Some people can't do all the different concept, animation, sketch, story, he can do everything. Some people can't, so they'll call and say, I like John, I want him, I looked at this sketch, but they need something digital and color and rendered, and we're like, okay, well, John doesn't do that, but, so we will offer them alternatives.
There's some guys that are really good at cars because they love cars. Yeah. That's something I usually don't do. That's why the cars thing was kind of a stretch for me. I'm like, I grew up with I went to school with it was a car design school, essentially. That was the big major at the school. So everybody around me, they were drawing 100 cars a day. Something I've never drawn. So it was kind of a fun challenge for me, but and then there's some guys that they're not necessarily good for quick, rough, kind of figuring out the sequence stuff, because they're not necessarily sketch artists that would just doodle something, but they're guys that are amazing at rendering and painting. So, and you saw a lot of the stuff she showed was even more with that, because it's more about usually doing 4 to 6 frames for a commercial. Look, this is, we're selling soap, so we got the nice shot of the soap box, but you can go grab a reference for that from online and make sure the highlights look right, and it's not about the angle and how it's going to be made. Yeah, so that's sort of, yeah.
Back to if we could bring it up, the basketball one.
Yeah.
So that had like a lot of very specific looking shots that you drew out.
Mhm.
And my question is, how much are they giving you in that? Like, that's very specific things. How much is the director giving you, and how much are you just interpreting from the script?
It's always
How does that
different
work?
because every director's different. This one, I think we talked through it in length. And what's for the directors that I work with and stuff, what's really useful is if they do little doodles, that could be helpful. But a lot of directors, they might not be able to do things really dynamic, you know, like they'll be worried about drawing it dynamic. So one of the other things that they'll do a lot of times, and I didn't have a good example of it, but they'll give me a bunch of images that feel like the thing they want to make. So for this kind of thing, I think they actually gave me a couple of images that were kind of like, I want it to feel like this. Like there was sort of like, he had a dramatic shot that was kind of like this guy, he's sliding after he jumps this huge ravine, you know? And so it's kind of a back and forth because some of the bits and he really wanted this to be a big moment. So I actually doodled these. I was like, well, you want to sell that this ravine is high up, so let's do a low angle, let's do a front shot. And I don't even know if we wound up doing this. The best part is you kind of can see the sequence when you go through shot by shot, especially if you worked it out. And it just makes it easy. You can just cut shots, you know? And I think there's a couple in here that we wound up cutting and a couple that we wound up changing, but it's just a good process, you know? Which I don't think I've done a ton of that here, but like the longer the sequence, the more crucial it is to just really kind of like, you know, because there's a rhythm. Every shot transitions into another shot. Because the thing that goes into editing, but when you're shooting, not only is there like the 360, the 180 degree rule and all that, the kind of traditional filmmaking stuff, but there's also language as far if it's something you're going to shoot for how the eye transitions from shot to shot. So like if the focal point of this shot is the ball going in, because your eye's going to travel to wherever the contrast is, the next shot you actually don't want to make if it's a fast shot, you don't want to make your eye travel that far. So this point, say it's going to edit to this shot, this is where your eye is actually going to start on the next shot. So that's why like in filmmaking a lot of times they'll shoot, go on a random tangent, but anytime it's a short insert shot, you put it dead center. Like, you know, like the people always talk about like the rule of thirds, how you want to place things like kind of like on a tic-tac-toe board on the corners for visual interest. But if it's like somebody's getting punched in the face and it's like a quick edit, you put it like dead center of frame, just so that because one of the things that makes things feel cheap versus expensive in filmmaking is just the readability and how easy it is to read. And that's really the difference when we say something cinematic. What we're actually saying is there's a focal point. Like my eye isn't wandering, it's not confused, it's because you get sort of like this anxious eye strain that we all feel when we're watching something that's not well constructed or really well thought out like this, you know. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, is that it?
I've got one more question then. And how does it vary for you, because you work with both a director telling you what to do for, say, a commercial or a film, and then an art director at a different place? What is that experience? How does it vary? What is the role of an art director versus the role of a director for you?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of input are you getting as an artist from both?
Usually, typically, they're very similar. I mean, directors tend. I think honestly they're really similar. The difference is just that there is a huge range of directors and art directors. There's ones that, and you just try and make them feel better, they'll be really nervous to talk to you. They're just not sure about their idea. And that's your goal, is just to plus that idea and make it better. And sometimes they just, you know, yeah, they're just really nervous to get anything out. So you kind of got to hold their hand and kind of thumbnail stuff and kind of, because they're just not used to thinking about it that way. Because the process of writing a story and figuring out the story is so different from actually like communicating it visually that, I mean, it makes sense. You know, they don't want to screw it up because it's like everybody can see a picture and say, I don't like that. That doesn't really work. But it's a weird thing. 10 people could read the same script, and some people are like, I think it works. And then, you know, So I think that committing to something is, it's a nerve-wracking thing, you know. But I think art directors and directors are usually it's usually pretty similar, you know, for the most part. Yeah. The directors, they tend to get hung up a little bit more because a lot of times they're shooting coverage and stuff. So their mind they actually usually are a little bit more okay with like the looseness of whatever the boards are, and they understand that there's going to be a lot of filling in the gaps, because with films, you're doing all the main sequences that they're going to do, either effects, like the expensive sequences. Yeah, that's yeah, pretty similar. Yep. Cool, guys. Well, thanks.